Quick content warning. This video is a review of a really old white supremacist movie. So, if you're sensitive to topics such as racism, the KKK, white supremacy, things like that, viewer discretion is advised. So real quick, before we get into the actual meat of the video, I just want to say one kind of really off-topic thing that kind of bothers me online. A lot of people talk about like chads and, giga chads and stuff like that, and that's all fine and good, but no one ever seems to acknowledge terachads. Now, what's that? It's really simple. Someone who is even above giga chads. And in order to become that, all you have to do is click the subscribe button down below, turn on bell notifications, like the video, and comment engaging with the video. Do all this and you will become a terachad. Now, in all seriousness, today we are going to be discussing a movie called The Birth of a Nation. It came out in 1915 and was directed by a guy named W. Griffith. He also produced it, and so it's kind of an auteur work. And it's worth mentioning, even though I didn't touch on this with the content warning, it was even boycotted at the time. And this was a time during Jim Crow laws, where it was arguably at its height. Probably the second most racist time in our country's history, preceded only by the time where slavery was legal. And it was boycotted even then. It is considered that racist. But before I do get into that, this entire series is basically going to be me reviewing movies outlined in the must-see movies section of the 2021 edition of the Film Book by Robert Bergan. And so the first one is obviously Birth of a Nation. And it even describes that it was boycotted at the time, but is considered a technical masterpiece. And watching it, it is kind of interesting to see where a lot of tropes and cliches that are very much associated with like modern blockbuster epic movies comes from. You've got things like the comic relief sidekick helping the main characters in their time of need in a way that is somewhat comical. You've got the last stand during the climax, where a group of our heroes are being surrounded by the bad guys and have to do everything that they can to fight back, despite the hordes of bad guys outside, until the heroes show up and are able to save them, this massive cavalry. You've got the bad guy who kidnaps the love interest and attempts to have a forced marriage with her. And I'm saying bad guys in air quotes, because the bad guys are the black population. Again, the movie is racist, but you don't know the whole thing of it, because the heroes are the Ku Klux Klan, otherwise known as the KKK. Yes, really. And that is probably the second part that makes this the hardest to watch. That it is so blatantly racist. And again, even for the time. And the racism, that aspect of the racism actually almost comes out of nowhere, because the first part of the movie, there are some pretty basic, like, racist stuff in it, like blackface, very racist stereotypes. But for the most part, that was, like, pretty common in that area. So, like, for the first hour and a half you're watching this movie, you're almost wondering, like, why it has such a bad reputation, considering the time it came out in. But then, you get to about 2 hours into the movie, and it just goes completely balls to the wall, horribly racist. And now a lot of you may be thinking, I said that that's the second thing that makes this very hard to watch. What's the first? And that is just the runtime. It is over 3 hours in length and is a silent movie. But even for silent movies, for the most part, there's barely any dialogue for, like, the first hour. Instead of, like, the dialogue cards that you'll normally see from, like, 1920s movies before they could incorporate sound, it doesn't use those, and the first one doesn't come in until almost 12 minutes into the movie. And then the second one doesn't come in until over an hour into the movie. So it's basically the, like, equivalent of, like, if a movie started with, like, an 11-minute montage after the opening credits, followed by a short scene where there's almost no dialogue, followed by yet another montage, this time, like, roughly 50 minutes long, and then the movie kind of gets started. I watched this on YouTube, on a YouTube video. I'll link that in the description below, or at the very least in the pinned comment if I forget. And most of the comments were basically like, I had to stretch this out over, like, a week because it is that boring. At least based on, from, like, our modern perspective. But yeah. Now, a couple good things. The actor that got to play Abe Lincoln in the first part of the movie is, pretty good. He looks exactly like Abe Lincoln. He is the only actor who I know who his character's name is, because he looks so much like Abe Lincoln. Because there are really no lines of dialogue, unless you have a scene with, at least for the first hour of the movie, whenever you have a scene, unless it's between two people of different genders, and they have very obvious gendered names when they're introduced through the title cards, it's pretty much just you have to guess the character names at that point. And that also adds to how difficult it can be to watch. With that being said, there are, like, a couple funny moments. I laughed at this scene, for example. Hey, this is editing Clayton here. It just occurred to me that the reason why I laughed at this isn't as obvious. So basically it's just the idea of this actor in the studio looking at this thing and just saying, whoa, like fucking Keanu in The Matrix. So, yeah. There's also a scene near the end where it's kind of, it's around the third act, I guess you could say, where it shows the guy getting, like, his inspiration for the KKK costumes, And it's from watching these kids play with a sheet, the fucking white sheet, to pretend to be ghosts. And that is where he gets the idea for the costumes. It is so fucking stupid in that part, and it is hilarious. A quick warning though, I am about to start talking about the racism in this movie, so if you are understandably sensitive to that, go to this time's frame. It is also a little interesting to see where some of the more racist stereotypes kind of come from, like the mammy stereotype, the stereotype of black people being rapists, and a lot of horrible criminals, and it is just, yeah. Again, was not joking with that content warning. Absolutely was not joking. So apparently, this movie was actually based on a book from 1905 called The Klansman, which, I shit you not, was sold as a pseudo-sequel to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. You know, the book that's all about how slavery and racism is actually a bad thing. The Klansman, which is a dramatized version of the origin of the KKK, is apparently supposedly a sequel to that by a completely different author, obviously. So that's kind of weird. One of the big changes, they changed the name and relationship between the main character and this one girl. In the book, I believe her name is apparently Flora Cameron. But in the movie, they changed her name to Elsie Stoneman and changed her from being a childhood sweetheart of the main character to her little sister, to his little sister. And by the end, she nearly gets raped by Gus, who is simply described as a renegade black man. So in conclusion, I would really only recommend watching this movie if you're either an aspiring filmmaker who wants to kind of create their own film education without having to pay for film school. You might want to watch this in your own free time. Or if you're interested in studying racial relations in the US, the movie can kind of give you an idea of where a lot of horrible racist stereotypes originated from. But other than those two things, and especially if you are sensitive to any kind of racism, you might want to avoid this movie like the plague. So yeah, join me next time for when I review a movie that I'm actually probably going to recommend in a series titled Must See Movies, for my review of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.